Everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Zoe Colon. I'm the Associate Director of Global Perspectives and International Initiatives and also proud Senior Advisor to the Puerto Rico Research Hub. Welcome again. This event is organized as part of our new initiative, the Global Women's Think Tank. And the mission is to advance women's rights through research-informed work, leadership development, and strengthening institutions infrastructure. We're still in development, but we are very proud and excited to offer this panel as part of our initial work. And we wanted to highlight folks at UCF championing women's rights and women's issues. And so with that, I'll go ahead and introduce our moderator for today, which is Mervat El-Jardi. Might have said that wrong, I'm sorry. Mervat is a member of the Global Perspectives team. Her title is Senior Coordinator and Special Advisor for Middle East and North Africa Affairs. And she has over a decade of diverse work experience in higher ed and is currently pursuing her doctorate in higher education leadership at UCF. Go Knights. She's obtained a Master of Education in Guidance and Counseling from the University of Central Oklahoma and proceeded to work in higher ed on MENA issues in the United States. She's passionate about international affairs and internationalization in higher ed and global engagement. She's held several positions as faculty member and student services professional. And at UCF, she's provided immigration advising and targeted support to UCF international students. And with that, I'll hand it over to Mervat.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you, Zoe, for your kind introduction. I would like to start by welcoming you all today for today's event, championing women across UCF and beyond, and really thanking you for joining us on this chilly morning here in Florida. It is my pleasure to be moderating this event today, and we have four amazing speakers who will share their experiences and extensive work in advocating and supporting women and women's issues, both in the community and globally. To kick off today's event, I will briefly introduce our speakers in the order of their presentation, starting with Dr. Bobrisky. Dr. Bobrisky is the interim director of the Women's and Gender Studies program and the director of Science Leadership and Mentoring (SLAM) at UCF. SLAM is a mentoring program between UCF women students and 7th grade girls focusing on leadership, empowerment, and STEM. Dr. Bobrisky's research and teaching focus on social inequalities and social justice, women and leadership, and girls studies. In her classes, she partners with community organizations to provide service learning experiences for her students. And next, we have Dr. Leandra Preston. Dr. Preston is a senior lecturer in the Women's and Gender Studies program here at UCF. Some of her courses include Introduction to Women's Studies and Gender Studies, Gender and Technology, Girls Studies, Girls in the Body, and Virtual Girls. Her research includes gendered body technologies, virtual communities, and embodied resistance. Very exciting fact about Dr. Preston. In 2007, she founded Animal Safe House Program, which is a nonprofit providing foster for pets for people escaping domestic violence. Our third speaker for today is Dr. Yarasi. Dr. Yarasi is an assistant professor at UCF in the School of Health Management and Informatics and a visiting scholar at the FXB Center for Health and Human Rights at Harvard University. She's also a 2020-2021 Fulbright U.S. Scholar and a non-resident fellow at the Arab Center in Washington, D.C. Her work focuses on health, development, and human rights in fragile and conflict-affected settings. And Dr. Asi is actually joining us today from the West Bank, where she's conducting her research. We really appreciate you, Dr. Asi, being with us today, despite the rough situation currently happening in the West Bank. Last but not least, we have Dr. Fernando Rivera. Dr. Rivera is a professor of sociology and director of the Puerto Rico Research Hub at UCF. He's previously served as an intern assistant vice provost for faculty excellence, UCF a global faculty fellow, and provost faculty fellow. He has also served in different task forces related to accelerating Latino student success and Hispanic serving institutions. His research interests and activities are in sociology of health, medical sociology, disasters, and race and ethnicity. Dr. Rivera recently participated in a UCF Fulbright Hayes GPA short program titled A Woman's Place language, and culture alive in Argentina. And now I would like to turn the mic over to Dr. Babrisky, who will start us off and present on the work they do in the Women's and Gender Studies, focusing on community projects and how their students participate in these programs and projects in connection with civic engagement, activism, and praxis. Dr. Babrisky, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. So I should share my screen, correct? All right, is it up and able to see?
Yes.
Okay. Oh, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you, UCF Global Perspectives, for inviting myself and Dr. Preston and other colleagues. It's really great to share this platform with you and to share all the really amazing work that our students are, for the most part, doing at UCF, as well as our faculty. So I would love to share with you about our new programs and the work that we've been doing in the classroom in the Women and Gender Studies program. As you can see, our motto is standing for justice, knowledge, and action. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about how both our students, the projects that they do in the classroom, as well as our 15-year running award-winning mentoring program, SLAM, Science Leadership and Mentoring. So a great project that we actually started before I became interim. Dr. Santana Rogers was the director for Women and Gender Studies for 13 years, and pretty much everything that we're sharing today was also founded with her initiatives. So back in 2019, pre-COVID, Dr. Santana and Dr. Casanello from History Department collaborated on a project called First Women at UCF. And this was really to honor the first women, whether it was directors, leaders, SGA, any first women at UCF in the thinking back of 100 years from suffrage in 1920. I was pulled in because I teach women in leadership every year. And so this project we were going to have, and we did have my students collect oral histories from first women at UCF. And then we showcased them in the library during Women's History Month, right before the university shut down for COVID. And it was an amazing experience. My students started in groups and did everything from contacting the women to interview, to arranging the interview, coming up with the questions, audio recording, and transcription. And then my honors Women in Leadership course helped put up all the display for the event that was showcased in March 2020. And everything is digitally archived in STARS. And since then, every year, my class in the Women in Leadership program, Women in Leadership course, has continued this. And we have just kind of grown it. So it went from First Women at UCF to Women at UCF, particularly looking at women who have served for 20 years or more and or international. And this year, this fall, my course is looking at women identified student leaders to be part of the archive. So it's been a really exciting and ongoing project. Secondly, last semester in the spring, we partnered with Marta Dimes and Florida Health Justice Project. So in our Introduction to Women's Studies course, which I know Dr. Preston will share a little bit as well, we have service activist learning, which is where students are civically engaged and out in the community, working with community partners for 15 hours over the course of the semester. Usually we allow our students to kind of do their own projects, but we thought it would be a great opportunity to partner with two prominent organizations, nonprofits in Florida, and working with March of Dimes and Florida Health Justice Project on their It's Your Year initiative, which was a Medicaid expansion toolkit project. And what we did was we came together, all of the students were able to sign up for the different projects that March of Dimes and Florida Health Justice Project and I kind of brainstormed and thought would be interesting to students, beneficial to students, as well as to our community partners. So they made PSAs, social media outlets, webinars, website. They developed a website. They created comic strips, which you can see in one of the pictures, and opinion editorials. It was an amazing experience, I have to say. We had the community partner, Ms. Desiree Schnorr, seen in person, come into the classroom multiple times throughout the semester to work with students, to answer questions, to help guide them with projects. And we also had our community partner from Florida Health Justice Project in Miami Zoom in when we met all together. And at the end of the semester, each group presented their work for our community partners, and both the actual, whether it was a webinar or a website, as well as their poster. And this year, March of Dimes is working on implementing a lot of the work that the students had done for their Medicaid expansion project. So it was just a really collaborative and great experience, both for the students and for our community partners that we do great work with. And Ms. Schnorr said, Dr. Ann's students provided myself and our partner with valuable insight to issues around advocacy, policy, and public awareness for birthing people and families in Florida. When working with the students, we were able to keep a focus specifically on how the postpartum Medicaid extension would impact young people. The students were bright, engaged, and creative. And I can't second that enough. The students did amazing work. They worked so well together collaboratively, both in the classroom and off campus via Zoom. They just had great innovative ideas, and it ended up being just a wonderful experience overall. Now I'm going to turn to our award-winning, longtime standing mentoring program. Just a little bit in the background, it first started at UCF in 2007 as a leadership-only focused program called Young Women Leaders Program. After a grant from the American Association of University Women in 2016 for a pilot program that I called SLAM, we officially transitioned to SLAM specifically in 2019 because the pilot program was so successful. So science, leadership, and mentoring empowers girls to be assertive, brave, confident, independent, inquisitive, and proud leaders in STEM. We seek to promote girls' inspiration and excitement into STEM fields and careers while also building leadership abilities such as problem solving, teamwork, and cooperation, cultural identity, and ethnic pride, advocacy for positive change, and goals for the future. And what I really love most about our vision and our mission is that we believe all girls are influential leaders with innate leadership abilities. The structure of our program is very unique and very rewarding at every level. We meet on campus. This will actually be our first time since COVID. In the last 2 years, we were completely virtual, but we come back to campus every Wednesday. We actually meet in the Barbara Ying Center through Global Perspectives, and we meet for an hour and a half. And it's a mentoring program between UCF Women Identified students and 7th grade girls. And we call them bigs and littles. So our bigs are 100% voluntary. They don't receive any stipend or credit for classes. They really just are completely committed to mentoring 7th grade girls. And most of them talk about how they wish they had this opportunity when they were in 7th grade. A really unique part of this program is that it's not just leadership and STEM leadership for our littles, but also for our bigs. Once they have become a big for a year, they're able to be a facilitator. And facilitators basically run the program. They lead all of the meetings on campus. They are peer mentors to our bigs. They work very closely with the big and little pairs. And you can see in the bottom picture below, that's an example of our facilitators. And they're just very dynamic. They come up with curriculum ideas and are really the glue to the program. We now also have a program manager, which is a former facilitator. And that person runs the kind of everyday administrative work and working with parents, sending out emails, and really overseeing the program from an administrative perspective. And then myself, I oversee it at the top level, as well as Dr. Santana in the past years. And you can see some of the pictures. These are some of the events that we had. We had an engineering day at the top, where we had guest speakers. We bring in mad science for robotics and building creation. And then our bigs are really wonderful. They come from STEM majors, including aerospace engineering, pre-med, biochemistry, forensic science, nursing, computer science, physics, bioengineering, and more. And we really recommend and encourage them to take one of our women and gender studies courses, either women in leadership, girls studies, or introduction to women's studies, to kind of tie in our background and how we support women and girls and empowerment, as well as leadership and STEM. And it's just, as you can see, it's a very diverse, great group of young women that really come together to support each other and to support younger women. And lastly, this is just an example of some of the funding and grants that we've received. SLAM is self-supported and relies on donations, and sponsorships and grants. So it started with the Community Action Grant with the American Association of University Women. Wells Fargo Community Grant helped stabilize us for a couple of years. And then more recently, myself and Dr. Johnson from the English department, we received a UCF seed funding grant for Empower Through Play, which was an amazing project that had our bigs create a leadership video game that our littles tested out and is now available in the public space. So with that, it's just a brief kind of overview of some of the programs and offerings that we have in Women and Gender Studies. Thank you.
Mervad, you're muted.
Thank you, Dr. Rivera. So Dr. Barbrisky, thank you so much for this impactful and significant work. It truly creates a difference, not only in the lives of your students at UCF, but also in the lives of the students and the schools who are starting to form their identity and think about their future. So it's very significant. I thank you for that, and thank you for sharing this with us this morning. Please, as a reminder, we will try to answer all your questions. So if you have any questions, we did receive a lot of questions in the registration, but if you do have any additional questions, please go ahead and include those in the chat box, and we will try to address those at the end of the presentations when all the presentations are concluded. We now continue with Dr. Preston, who will share her partnership with One Body that involves service learning students working on various aspects of the Omitive Artisans projects across semesters. Dr. Preston.
I started my presentation too early, so then I had to go back here to unmute. So let me go back. So hello. Okay, I'm going to talk about my work with Ometepe artisans primarily, but I'm going to gloss over some of the other aspects of the things that I do to, bring activism to the classroom, to UCF, to students, and connect students to the community and the organizations operating within our communities. So I know this is being shared, so if we have access to the presentations after, I have included links and things within if people are interested in learning more. So I will go ahead and share my, let me share my screen. I apologize for, I should be an expert in this by now. Share screen. And here is my presentation. Okay, I'll start this slideshow. So I talk about change. It's in, teaching and making change, and the role of myself, and then my students, and then communities, and how we connect this. And of course, for the, scope of this, I'm going to focus on one body, but I think it's important to think about how we engage ourselves and our students when we do this work within our communities, particularly in the service learning work that we do in women's and gender studies. So you mentioned my Animal Safe House program, and that is the program that I started many years ago when I was still a graduate student and thought I could, teach full time and be a graduate student and run a nonprofit. But I have managed to sustain this organization with the help of students doing service learning work. So it has really connected just perfectly to be sustainable without me having to do all of the work. And of course, I have volunteers. So students played a role from the beginning of this program in creating our first logo, which I share here. And then on the right, you see our current logo and one of our Animal Safe House pets that I have, which if I have a barking dogs, I apologize because there is construction and I have a house full of dogs right now. So they've created our logo, our first website, forms, marketing, pretty much anything that was required for me to have an organization running. And then in 2010, students in Lisa Mills' film class created a short documentary that was featured in the 2010 Global Peace Film Festival that I still use. And we're going to be hosting a screening for in the near future for women's and gender studies, because it has been 12 years, but it's still as relevant as it was. They continue working with us often after the semester and sometimes go on to, work with their own nonprofit programs and work in related areas as domestic violence advocates. So it's, sustaining in many ways. I've talked a lot about how we can teach service learning virtually. And I think it's so important as we move into more online classes that we don't stop doing this work, that we don't see this as a reason to, drop certain requirements and creative ways of teaching. I think it actually lends itself even more effectively because you're dealing with students in various communities who are able to reach, within their own communities virtually. And it's just really so interesting the way that things can happen when you have students in so many classes doing so much work, and so many locations. It seems like it would be impossible, but it's really possible. So that's why I like to talk about that a lot. And that's what brought us to the work that we do with One Body Global. And One Body Global has another layer, which is a global layer. And we do a lot of global work in the virtual service learning projects. And I've talked in the past about the work we've done with I don't know why I'm blanking out, but I'll think about it. So I'm basically other global work that we've done without, ever having to travel there. But with One Body, we hope to travel there with service or with study abroad in a service learning class now that we can revisit these types of projects since COVID. So One Body Global Ministries is a 501c3. They've dropped the ministries part of their work because they're expanding more beyond their roots and into, the university and other spaces, and felt it was a bit limiting, but they're doing absolutely incredible work in Ometepe Island, Nicaragua, which is an island made of 2 volcanoes in Nicaragua. It's only accessible by ferry, so it's isolated in many ways. The political situation there is contentious and oppressive in ways that affect women and girls particularly. And so it lends itself to something that we could really, find many ways to connect to the students' academic work. And so they focus on the entire community. Their goal is to get the community, their program provides the community with the tools to be self-sustaining. They don't need the organization to be there to be, continue with the programs that they're setting up. So that's one of their goals. One of the early projects they did was install water filters, help teach people how to use water filters, provided them so everybody had water filters in their house, or at least one within each, village that was accessible. So before COVID, we were focusing on the issue of pregnancy in young girls. There are so many young girls having so many babies, and there's such poverty, and there's not really birth control. A lot of it is, related to cultural and religious issues, and as well as political issues. So these were also many things that we were able to, educate about and talk about with our students in the work that they were doing with this organization. And so we were trying to write a grant to work with the health clinic that they had helped set up to introduce accessible birth control and, culturally appropriate sex education, working with the women in the community to deliver these. And of course, COVID happened. And so we did not get the grant, but we were going to reapply, and we will reapply in the future, but their priorities changed and we were unable to go in there talking about these things, even though the need is still as great, if not more. So that led to them creating many other opportunities, and one that's going to lend itself to a study abroad opportunity, because they are creating a vocational and meeting space that is going to be a hub for workshops, classes, and events. They have a school now that they have created, and we can do Zoom classes with those students. When they do English teaching classes right now, students can do service learning in this way. Once the students in Ometepe are further along in their English, we will be able to have students do workshops virtually with these students. And it will be, we can talk directly to the girls and the women in these communities, and they can talk to our students, and they can, work together. We have so many ideas. It's very exciting. What's really neat about this program is that Rochelle and TJ, who are the couple that run this organization, live in Cocoa Beach. I happen to live in Cocoa Beach. They do this. They also live in Nicaragua half time about. They've actually built a house with the locals that they live at. It's kind of the hangout when they're in town. Everybody, they love them. They're they're hard. It's just, they're very genuine, authentic, and humble. And so it's very easy to work with them. It's easy to see that their intentions are pure, and that, they're open to working with, what we are doing in different programs and bringing whatever they can to the community that has been isolated. So we are now focusing on the vocational and meeting space and what we're going to do. And I was talking to Dr. Bubrisky about planning a trip to Ometepe to, a planning trip, meeting people, talking to women that we would be working with, and just helping create this space with them in whatever way that we can. And, and plans to use for the future as well. So I mentioned that they're sustainable programming. That's important to us in women's and gender studies, because we don't want students to create and work on projects and then, just they leave when their semester's over or they graduate. So that's one thing that was appealing about Ometepe. So my other project that we've done with the students in our women's and gender studies classes is the Ometepe Artisans, which is made up from artisans in Ometepe. And Rochelle was just stunned by the jewelry they were making and the access to the different natural resources they had, because they're on the top of volcanoes. So they have incredible, seeds and rich soil that's making just all kinds of resources. So she wanted to elevate that and help them make a living from it. And so it really, in conversation about service learning, this happened because one of the students' moms had an Etsy selling clothes. And she was like, why don't we do an Etsy? And the students created this Etsy. And it is so, because last time I screenshot this for a presentation, it was like 70 sales, and now it's got 220 sales. And this is life-changing for these artisans. They have their jewelry in stores now. You know, students do so much different aspects. This is, you know, student models, the students model their pictures. They do so many things now. They've created social media. Sorry, I'm going a little fast on this. I want to make sure I have time to cover this. So service learning projects that they've done with the Ometepe artisans over the semesters in primarily virtual classes have been create their Etsy store that you just saw, create their TikTok, which I've linked to everything, an Instagram, a Facebook. They've been working on a project doing artist bios and highlighting the artists themselves, 2 of which are women, 1 is a man, but now they're adding more. They've created a apprentice program because the artisans that are the main artisans on the island are getting older. They're losing their sight. You know, one of the women's hands are arthritic. And so they're not going to be able to do this. So they're teaching younger artisans to do this and carry this on. And so there's so many layers to the work that they do that touch so many different aspects of the community that it's really incredible. And it can be applied to so many different courses at UCF. I think it's a rich community partner as well. So they just completed a fundraiser, and 2 of my students, I attended the fundraiser and helped her do that. And they, you know, they do a lot of fun things too, but I wanted to share some of the photos in a short, like 1-2 minute video that emphasizes that, you know, the creation of this hub that we're talking about, that we're hoping to have our future. You know, dreaming is free, Dr. Santana always says. So, you know, that's what we do. I like how it's the local to global change that we're effectively engaging in online. It's like this, wow, how is this happening? You know, it's just really incredible what you can do with the resources that we have and the tools that are available to all of us at UCF, and now available to Ometepe students as well, because they now have access to, you know, they've been getting laptops donated, and they've got, you know, they have, I don't remember if it was 8 or 10, but they have all these adult students now who have college scholarships to the university in Nicaragua that they are funding. It's just absolutely incredible. This is the water filtration system. And then they got some books and programs. They never had books for the school. They were using other, you know, sharing an iPad they had, but now they got some books and they all have the same ones. She said they like that. They do a lot of microloans for women that are, you know, creating other things. And that was something they were doing a couple years ago. And they're still doing it, but we were featuring that a little bit more. But they're just doing so much work. And the way that they're doing it is because the community's doing it. You know, they aren't going in there and doing all of this. They're going in there and working with the community and just basically plugging them into resources that they have, because they, you know, aren't just isolated on the island. They can connect the island to all of these other resources. And now the island can connect themselves because they have access. So this is the vocational space, and it's really neat because underneath it's enclosed and it's going to be a classroom, but up here, this is on the main strip. She said, I've never been there, but I'm really excited to go. I feel like I've been there because I've been following her for so long and working with them for so long, but this is the main strip. Like if you're going to have a downtown in Ometepe, this is it right here. So everybody who is hanging out on the weekends or doing what they do is going to be passing this, she says. So it's going to be a really exciting development in Ometepe. And so they're going to have music on the top, you know, they're going to have musicians and this and that. So we were already talking about when we go that we're going to have yoga classes, you know, bring a yogi and have, you know, bring the women and the men and anybody who wants to come and do the yoga. And it would just be really fun and neat. So anybody who in your program who is interested in working with them, I know Rochelle would be more than excited and enthused to talk to you. She came in, met with MC and Dr. Ann and MC a couple years ago. I think it was before COVID. So I'm going to show you this very short video. This is the development of the partnership for education and vocation. This is phase 1. Let me see if I can move this and I can make this bigger. I don't know. Sorry, it's so small. Oh. Oh, I thought it was a little, anyway, this, and then it links to their page. So it's really, they have so many Oh, this was the one. This one's a little, this is, you see more of it. It's only like 1.5 minutes. That's Rochelle. Every project they do, they pay the locals a more than fair wage. So everything they do is really, I mean, that's why the locals really love them as well, because they give them jobs when they go. And even when they're not there. So you see, that's the main thoroughfare, she says. So that's pretty much so that is what we are doing with Ometepe Artisans. I don't want to take too much credit for the work that they're doing at all, but I'm grateful to the students. I want to give the credit to the students, the credit that they deserve for doing this work. And more than anything, you know, the people running this organization and the community. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry.
Thank you, Dr.
am-
Preston. This is very exciting. And I just want to go back a little bit to what you mentioned earlier about the importance of engaging ourselves and our students.
How do I stop this?
You can just stop sharing.
Is that me? I don't know. I'm so sorry. I have no idea what's going on, but there we go.
Dr. Preston, going back to what you mentioned earlier on the importance of engaging ourselves and our students, I think it's extremely important work. I think it's providing our students with opportunities for learning in a real world context is invaluable. But what's equally important is also in creating and ensuring that these programs are sustainable. It's not, you know, one semester and we move on and then it ends. These programs are continuing, are sustainable, and providing a lot of value to the communities. It serves the communities that they're in. So thank you so much for this work. It's very, very impressive. Next, I would like to welcome Dr. Ozzie, who will be discussing her research on women in global health and development, especially in the Middle East and North Africa region, and why this work is very important. Dr. Ozzie.
Thank you so much. Thank you to the office for inviting me and for holding this event. And it's really interesting to see the work of my other colleagues. You know, UCF is so big that it's easy to overlook what our colleagues are doing. So it's great to see these initiatives within the community. I'm going to take a slightly different approach today in my presentation and talk a little bit about my research, specifically my research that's focused on women and empowering women and women's rights. My work that focuses on gender has 3 different tacks. So the first, the most broad, is women in global health. And this is not just global health delivery, but global health leadership, women working as providers, and importantly, women and their unpaid caregiving roles. So throughout the world, and especially in the Middle East, we see women taking an outsized role in unpaid caregiving. This can be as basic as, you know, staying at home, watching children, caring for elderly family members, caring for family members with disabilities, but also women working as community health workers and in other more formal roles that may not be paid for their services, but are doing so to sustain and support their communities. This is incredibly common in the Middle East. The Middle East has the highest percentage and proportion of unpaid caregiving work by women. Now, this is slowly changing as women's fertility rates are slightly decreasing and more women are entering the workforce as a result of higher education and slightly changing gender roles, but we are not anywhere near full equality in any country or any region in the world, including the United States, Western Europe, these places that we generally see as the most gender progressive. The second tack is the role of women in security and health security. Typically security is defined very narrowly. When we talk about security, we're typically thinking military, national security, border security, etc. But I think as the last few years have shown us, none of us feel secure if we aren't feeling healthy. Security is hard to find if you are homeless, if you're unemployed, if you're in an abusive relationship. There's many aspects to human security: water insecurity, food insecurity. And so there's a new, emerging over the last several decades band of research that's looking at redefining security to include human, security, and the role of women in that. And then looking at health security, I don't have to tell all of you about the pandemic. Looking back, there's many different areas where globally we fail to protect, especially the most vulnerable. So when we look at the disparate numbers of women in health leadership roles and other marginalized people, we have to wonder if these voices were more elevated, might we have gone through the pandemic, which is ongoing, slightly smoother and with less adverse effect on, again, our most vulnerable communities around the world. And then the last thing I look at is women's human rights. Now, this is a huge topic. This could be an entire dissertation topic, but I specifically focus on rights, especially as they relate to freedom of movement. Now, this is something that many women around the world may not necessarily consider as restrictive, but in many parts of the world, women are explicitly or implicitly, expected or discouraged from leaving the home by themselves, maybe discouraged from seeing male physicians by themselves, but also in other parts of the world, including the United States and again, Western Europe, women may choose not to leave the home because they fear violence, because they fear physical insecurity. And so what are the effects of restricted freedom of movement on women's lives and especially on women's health? And so these are the three of the things that I look at in my work as they relate to gender. And now I'll talk a little bit about some projects that I worked on. So this is one of my more recent papers. At the beginning of COVID-19, many countries released these kind of COVID-19 response plans. What do we do, right? And so with a team from around the world, we looked at COVID response plans for countries that are conflict affected. And so these are countries that are experiencing some level of fragility, war, violence. And we looked at these countries because in general, these countries are typically less likely to have gender parity across the board. And so we wanted to see the extent to which gender was considered in their COVID response plans, because we know that women and households were really disparately affected during COVID. Kids were staying home. Most of the time it was mothers who were responsible. Mothers are more likely to deal with healthcare needs and dealing with sick children and family members. Women that were stuck at home with domestic abusers, were stuck at home with them and were less likely to have access to the outside world. Girls were less likely to go to school, which is where many reports of domestic violence are made. And so what we found was that this may not surprise you, but we are not doing great in terms of gender responsiveness in these COVID response plans. Now, we looked at plans towards the beginning of the pandemic, and another leg of research we're looking at is now that we've hopefully learned some lessons, will we see more attention to gender specific issues like girls' schooling, like domestic violence, like unpaid caregiving in future pandemic and other disaster plans? And that remains to be seen. And then this is another paper I wrote trying to consider and include freedom of movement as a determinant of women's health. Now, obviously, the Middle East was have featured in this work, primarily because a lot of the literature focuses on the Middle East, because we have countries that have explicit laws against women sometimes leaving their homes. There are countries where, for example, when a woman is menstruating, she is expected to be isolated. But again, when you look at recent laws in the United States about abortion and other reproductive rights, you know, how does freedom of movement affect these women, their ability to receive the health care that they need? We don't really often consider this. There's very little research on this, especially in the West. And so this was just my trying to incorporate this as in part of the discussion so that more future research on how women's health, well-being, and safety is affected by their inability to have autonomy about where they go, how they go, and who they go with. And so this is a line of work that I expect to continue on in my career. And I think it's a reminder that when women are not part of these conversations, they're just overlooked. And so my goal is in doing this, and I also encourage my students is, you know, don't just look at what's been published, because often when we look at literature, we're building off, but sometimes we have to look at phenomena that is understudied. And the best way to do that is to have diverse voices at the table to, you know, uncover the real life lived experiences of people. And so women are half the population. They're not a niche group, you know, to be studied. So we need to look at the specific incidences that may cause them to have lower health outcomes, and also, you know, just have lower quality of life because of implicit or explicit policy choices. This was a paper I did with a colleague about how potentially incorporating health information technology may help promote women in the workplace, especially when women's freedom of movement is restricted. We all kind of made friends or enemies with Zoom in the past few years. So we're all kind of a little more used to digital technologies than we were when I wrote this paper. But how can things like telehealth, telemedicine, help women, not just in the workplace, but women as patients? So women domestic abuse survivor, for example, if they have access to resources on their own personal device or phone, they don't have to leave the house. They don't have to tell their abuser that they're going somewhere. Can that increase their potential? And also for women who are discouraged from leaving the home to work, if they can be on the receiving end of, you know, providing health services from, can that contribute to equality? Now, obviously, true equality is all people being able to experience autonomy. But while we work towards that, are there ways that we can leverage technology in ways that are beneficial to marginalized communities? And I think the evidence suggests that there is potential in that. Of course, there are some drawbacks, there are privacy issues. There is a technology gap in many low middle income countries. Women are less likely to have access to the internet, have their own phone, have their own computer. So there's a lot of barriers to overcome, but we can't identify those barriers and overcome them until we are talking about them and have these kinds of conversations. And then lastly, I looked at kind of my pet topic, which is human security in conflict-affected populations. So just like women are overly represented in delivering health, but poorly represented in health leadership, women are overly affected by conflict and war, but they are greatly underrepresented in ending these wars, in peace negotiations, in peace talks. And even though the little bit of literature that's out there about this shows that when women are included, peace talks are more sustainable because they think about factors that when you just have men at the table, they're not considering. For example, when women are allowed to be in police in certain countries, other women feel more comfortable reporting abuse and other issues. When women are at the table, they think about, okay, well, this head of household, this woman, she has to travel miles to get water for her family. Along the road, she experiences landmines, or she's at risk of sexual violence. How can we deal with that? So again, it's not just about elevating women and only women, but it's about including voices at the table so that all perspectives And it's not just equity for equity's sake. We find that outcomes are better when we have the voices of everyone included. And again, women are half the population. Women are proportionally more affected by conflict in the household because it's often the men that go to battle, or men are more likely to be imprisoned, kidnapped, disappeared by other means. Women are left in charge of households. Women have to find ways to keep their children going to school. So it only makes sense that when we're thinking about national security, we prioritize including these voices at the table. I want to end with this work is important. So in just terms of health, women make up 75 to 80% of the global health workforce. So this includes midwives, nurses, community health workers, but a mere fraction of leadership. And this also includes physicians, doctors, but also the people that run the institutions of health. It's primarily men. And so this is a significant disparity that intuition, but also evidence shows us leads to worse health outcomes for all of us. Women when they do work in these environments, they're underpaid, or in many cases, they're not paid at all. This affects household ability to succeed, household's ability to send a child to college, to purchase a car, to purchase that computer. When women do this work, they're undervalued. So there's research that shows that day-to-day healthcare jobs of women, like nurses and midwives, that patients see more frequently, are less respected and appreciated than, for example, physicians, doctors, CEOs, which are more likely to be men, or their work is just overlooked. So many countries depend on women's unpaid labor to fill in gaps that our health systems don't. And yet women are never compensated or even really valued for doing this work. Who would take care of the elderly if most women were not doing this work unpaid? And so while we may not necessarily need to pay them, many women say, I don't want to be paid for this. We should value and respect that work and find ways to compensate. And lastly, just like in all sectors, gender exclusive policies are not just harmful to men. They're harmful to children, they're harmful to men, they're harmful to communities. And so again, this is not just equity for equity's sake, even though that would be valuable enough. We are doing ourselves a disservice by not including women in these conversations, by not having women at the table as decision makers. Does that mean that every woman's ideas every time are going to be successful? No, but that's not the case for everybody. And so we need to ensure that we afford women the opportunity, just like has been afforded to men and women and other marginalized populations, to have a voice in how the world they live in functions. And when we do so, we all suffer. And hopefully we're heading closer, not further away from a world where there's something we have to consider. So that's and I wanted to say, looking at, especially just look at the news today, look at Iran and what women are doing there. Dynamics are changing. Women are having less children. They're going to school more. Social media has afforded women the ability to see how things are around the world. And so this path is changing. And so we want to meet the challenge where it is. We don't want to be behind. We should be proactive in supporting these changing gender dynamics. Women are leading the way, oftentimes at great risk to themselves and their own lives. And so how can we, from more comfortable positions, support and elevate these women who are doing a lot of work, often at great risk? And so that's really what I wanted to talk today. And I'm happy to speak with anybody about my research. If this interests you, I'll put my email in the chat. And I appreciate the opportunity to share this with you all today. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Asi, for highlighting these challenges, especially bringing up the concept of security and freedom of movement. Sometimes we are not aware that these challenges actually have political, economic, social implications that extend globally and beyond the immediate communities that it affects. And I think you brought up very important points on breaking barriers can be achieved by raising awareness on these issues, not to start with, including women at the table, as you mentioned, giving them a voice at the table, engaging allies and leveraging partnerships really to bring about a collective and transformative solutions to these problems, because there's still a lot to be done. Unfortunately, there's still a lot to be done, although we're heading in the right direction, I hope. I would like to invite now Dr. Rivera to present on his experience participating in the Fulbright Hayes program that is titled A Woman's Place, Language and Literature, A Life in Argentina. This project was organized and directed by two UCF faculty members, Dr. Maria C. Santana and Professor Maria T. Redman. Dr. Rivera.
Thank you, and thanks for all these insights. And one of the things out here is the overlapping interests of what we have in terms of and looking at women's issues from a global perspective in itself. So as I get my presentation here that hopefully you can see out here, and I'm going to try to keep my 10 minutes out here so we can get to the discussion aspect of it. I just want to take a brief moment to tell you about the Puerto Rico Research Hub in terms of the stuff that we do out here. And one of the issues out here is also, women's issues on the island sometimes get overlooked sometimes, and they're so important out here. And really quickly looking at what we do at the Puerto Rico Research Hub, we have 4 things that we do, which is academic research, students outreach, and partnerships in terms of looking at that. And this is kind of like an open invitation that if you have some of those topics that relate to your scholarship or anything that you do, that there's a space and a place actually here to see how does it fit with a specific group here, not only in Central Florida, but also in Puerto Rico as well. As you can see, I'm just going to quickly browse through this in terms of some of the work that we've done. And obviously a lot of the results out here have been as a consequence of climate change and some of the issues that happened after Hurricane Maria. And now in 2022, we still have sort of that replay out here. And usually when you have that climate migration, a lot of the issues is female-led migration, right? Some of the topics that we talked about, women that are in charge of kids with special needs, taking care of the elderly parents, and sort of having to deal with those consequences out here. One of the things that we do is we try to get students involved in all the process out here. And we have to acknowledge that, a majority of the students that I work with, at UCF, the gender ratio out here, we know that it's overwhelmingly female as well, and sort of kind of like the issue of what we do, the work that we do out here. We also like to do outreach in terms of, not only what we learn out here, but also how do we disseminate that information out here. So we do different events out here, and TV shows, and even a podcast series that you can check out in your spare time out here. And finally, we have partnerships, because this is an important part of it. We cannot do it by ourselves out here in terms of looking at other groups, other UCF faculty, and other nonprofit group, businesses, Chamber of Commerce, elected officials, to make sure that what we find out here, we can actually turn into some policy recommendations out there. And you can see some of the groups that we have partnered with out there. And obviously this becomes really important as we become a Hispanic serving institution. And just a reminder that around 29% of our undergrad student population comes from a Hispanic Latino background out there. And sometimes we tend to just focus on other issues, but it's important that we sort of understand kind of like those global perspectives, especially the Latin American perspective out here. So just to give you kind of like a sense, like Mervat in the introduction suggested, that I was fortunate enough to take part as a participant. So this is sort of what I want to share in terms of this, right? In terms of the opportunity to learn more. Now you understand a little bit more why I had some of the emphasis out here in Puerto Rico and Argentina in terms of that, but it tells you a little bit about the program out here in terms of that. And I think one of the key features out here of the program, it was to participate with K-12 teachers that give you a different perspective out here. And again, I'm a sociologist. I always look at this as structural, right? And, one of the things, this great opportunity that was, given to UCF faculty, I was the only male participant in the group out here, which it shows you again, that we need to really see this beyond we need to more participation of male faculty and researchers out here to look at sort of those issues. So kind of like my project was to learn and contrast the experience of Argentinian women that to Puerto Rican women, and kind of like looking at the numbers out here in terms of that, it matches exactly out here in terms of the percentage of the population in terms of male female ratios out here in terms of that. So I'm going to share a little bit about sort of my experience out here, and just to give you a sense, kind of like Puerto Rico is kind of like in the middle of this, right? And usually we tend to look at up north for guidance, but there's a whole other continent out here, and there's a whole other world in terms of the experiences that we can learn from as well. So, in looking at sort of the impressions out here in the role of women in Argentine society, obviously, we have the great figure of Evita Perón. Just to say out here, I'm not an expert in Argentina, but this were kind of like my impressions out here. So Evita Perón was the one that brought the vote to females in Argentina. And Argentina has a very complicated history in terms of dictatorships and issues like that. And one of the things that we want to do with this is, can we create educational materials out here of the videos and lectures that we took upon, and we're in that process of doing that. I wanted to show you also, that a statue that is out there of Juana Azurduy, with basically she was one of the indigenous fighters when there was the liberation wars in the 1800s out here. And this was a controversial type of statue out here that was brought up by the president of Argentina at the time, Cristina Kirchner, that basically this statue had replaced Christopher Columbus in front of the Casa Rosada, which is the place of government out here. So they put it straight out there. When there's a change in administration, they move the statue to another place. And now there's kind of like this empty hole in front of the Casa Rosada. Christopher Columbus is another side of town out here, but it shows you that still this is a developing aspect of what's going on out here. One of the things that are going on in Argentina, and talk about the issues of safety, right? In 2019, they put the Micaela law, and there was a young woman that came out of she was just going out of a club and get kidnapped by somebody, get murdered, and basically out of that, that the public outrage of one of the things that came out there, was creating this Ministry of Women, Gender and Diversity, and sort of implementing, the rights of women, but also LGBTQ plus in every single aspect of society out here. So now it's mandated at all levels of government and industry that these issues are resolved out here. And that has led to sort of how do we view this gender perspective in public spaces, right? And one of the things that really resonated with me, what Dr. Jari was saying in terms of freedom movement. So, on the onset is, look, you have like different representation. I have kind of like some children's books out here. So, look at Evita Perón, looking at sort of, the intersections with race and everything out here, looking at that, it figures like Gauchito Hill, and these are children's books, right? In terms of looking at the history of here. But we have to remember that Argentina is just coming off a dictatorship that ended up in 1983, when a lot of the things, the complicated story out here. But really quickly, in terms of looking at the gender perspective in public spaces, one of the things that they did was trying to look, how long does it take women to get from point A to point B? And this is where you start and open up and still the work that has to be done in Argentina. So, a fascinating statistic was that in Argentina, 70% of all the license or permits to drive belong to men. Only 30% of the population, of the female population in Argentina actually have a permit to drive. So that tells you a little bit about sort of this perspective of freedom movement, all those sort of things when we're talking about, domestic violence, talking about care of the children, about transporting your everyday life out here. One of the things that, and to briefly finish, the comparison, right? And in terms of looking at that, and the United Nations does have some initiatives that are looking at this I go like just to put you out here, the importance of data and research that still we don't have out here. And these are sustainable goals that development goals that have out here in terms of that. But it tells you, some of the differences out here between the two countries. And obviously one of the things that, now I'm working on is sort of looking at, the future step. How do I create some of that educational material that can be used in classes, but can bring about some of the differences and similarities, but also, bring about that perspective. Because one of the things that I did realize, and that's kind of like my clock here, my timer, to remind myself to be over. One of the things is that, especially with Puerto Rico, up to the 1800s, we were part of the Latin American history, a lot of overlaps out here. And if one thing that I've learned and lived through there was a reminder, and I had kind of like had this shirt out here, in terms of that, I couldn't get the camera out here, but that our history is also shared with some of the Latin American issues that sometimes, we don't emphasize enough. And I think there's room for comparison, and there's room for learning out here, not only in Latin America, but also kind of like global issues out here, as we've seen from other presentations out here. So with that, I'll leave it at that and turn it back to you, Rebecca.
Dr. Rivera, thank you very much and for the work that you do, especially comparing this latest project that you were involved in, comparing the experiences of Argentinian women to the women in Puerto Rico in relationship to the role in society or the challenges that they have. It is, to me, it is yet another confirmation that women's issues are not siloed and they are interconnected regardless of, despite the geographic region that you live in. So thank you for your work and thank you for sharing that project with us. We now can move ahead and start with the question and answer session. Before we start, I would like to mention, as I mentioned earlier, Dr. Asi was currently joining us from the West Bank as she is there now as part of her Fulbright scholarship, and she was joining us from another location to avoid any power or internet interruptions. She had to leave. I think she is no longer with us. She had to leave and return home due to she had to leave early due to safety concerns. So I really appreciate her participation. And if you're still there, thank you very much, Dr. Asi, for being with us today. We will go ahead and start with the first question. We did receive, as I mentioned, a lot of questions from the audience before this event during registration. And this question is for all the members of our panel today. And we will start with Dr. Babrisky, if that's okay. Tell us about your role at UCF and the programs or initiatives around women and women's rights that you did not discuss in your presentation earlier, or you would like to elaborate more on.
Sure. Well, as the interim director, I really am just trying to continue the amazing programs that Dr. Santana had put in place over the last decade. And two in particular, most people don't know that our program is one of the few in the country that has a girls' studies track. And actually, Dr. Preston founded that. I'm sure she can speak a little bit more on the timeline because it was before I became faculty. But it's just it's a great opportunity of another ignored kind of population or underlooked population. And it's very intersectional. We look at the push out with Black young women and girls. We work with, Latinx populations. And that's also how our mentoring program started. It kind of came out of this girls' studies focus. And so it just keeps evolving, and we still have a girls' studies track. I teach the girls' studies course every year. It's offered, and Dr. Preston teaches other ones as well. And the other wonderful and really activist work that Dr. Santana put her heart and soul into is working with the Apopka farm workers, the women farm workers in particular. And for 10 years running, we had a conference that was a day that was set aside for the women farm workers, basically to have all sorts of workshops, whether it was immigration rights, domestic violence awareness, self-care, health awareness. And our students would partake in the conference as volunteers for their service learning. A lot of them would work with the kids because we provided daycare on site so that the women could fully enjoy the day and get the most out of it. And our affiliate faculty, it's just an amazing community because we all came together. We would provide hygiene tote bags for every woman farm worker participant, and our affiliate faculties were so generous with helping with that and getting their students involved. And so I guess I just want to highlight how I think we really emphasize our collaborative work and our co-sponsorship and our work with other departments across colleges and across classrooms. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Preston, would you like to add to that?
Yes, I think it was around 2008 was the girl studies that we were working on developing classes. So I am, as a lecturer, I teach a tremendous number of classes. Actually, we teach, 4 different classes a semester sometimes, so that we can provide, the breadth of available courses and content that we want to make available to our students, given, that we are 2 faculty full-time in our program. Of course, with the, we couldn't do it without all of our affiliates because that's the majority of our courses. So, but as far as our WST prefix courses, we teach quite a few classes each semester. And so I've created probably over half of those classes over the years. From the girls studies track, we created, various courses and related to girls. And in the, masculinities area, I've also been doing that work and trying, and that also relates to my my domestic violence work in the animal safe house. And, that's all interconnected for me as my domestic violence work and my masculinities work. And then just really the service learning partnerships and doing the online service learning. I've, kind of appointed myself the person who really talks about all of that. And so we work together to do a lot of different things that are also connected, but it's perfect that we are interdisciplinary because that's how we do the work that we do in a very interdisciplinary, collaborative way. And it lends itself to that. And so it's really an incredible opportunity we have to work with so many different areas of the university. And so, if anybody has things that they're doing related to women or gender, we would love to work with you. And so, a little plug, and I've been with, I was the first women's and gender studies, or women's studies at the time, we became women's and gender studies. So I was the first full-time faculty member. And I just interviewed for the Women First at UCF program that Dr. Casanello and Dr. Santana have worked on. So that was really neat.
Thank you, Dr. Preston. Dr. Rivera, do you have anything to add?
I would say, working with students in terms of the mentorship and putting, and a lot of the things from the sociological background, looking at the intersectionality of these issues as well. And again, I think this is important topics to cover, and they're essential out here. Just the simple reason that, in probably most of my environments, the majority, the distribution, the majority are women, but we don't see that representation in terms of leadership positions and distribution of power and equity and those type of features. We need to continue to do that if we're gonna have, a meaningful change moving forward.
Thank you, Dr. Rivera. My next question is also for all members of the panel. We can use the same order. We can start with you, Dr. Baberski, again. And this is a topic that comes a lot in the context of higher education. Why is it important for academia to advance women's rights, and how do you think we can play a role?
Such a complex issue and topic, it's hard to just have a simple statement. Just as our panelists have talked about how in communities globally, women arguably are the foundation. They They provide the means and the necessities for their families. And I think as we've grown into this, to really emphasize intersectionality is such an important, because as we argue in women's studies, is that not one, there's not just one woman's experience. And as we've seen on the panel with the research, that it's so important to emphasize the differences and the different struggles and the different achievements and triumphs, and to appreciate and respect that. But if we don't have different voices at the table, we don't get to hear those stories. So I kind of argue that representation of having a diverse representation in leadership is just, it's just not just for students to see themselves as what they can be or what has happened, but just to have that diversity of experience that hasn't always been, voiced and recognized.
To follow that up, I'll say that, it also now we have been talking more about gender, which is obviously an important development, the way that we are talking about gender now, but it's important that we don't stop talking about women and women's issues, because women and women's issues still exist. They're still, they're in tandem. These things operate in tandem. I tell people we're talking about gender. Now we're talking about women and gender more specifically, and masculinity and men as well, in these, through these feminist lenses, through these intersectional lenses, that it's so important to consider each of these things through an intersectional lens. And so I think operating in the world through an intersectional lens, is going to make you a more, just effective human being, basically, whether it's in your workspace, in your interpersonal relationships, it provides a much deeper understanding of the world around you. And so I think that the work we are doing is so important, because it gives students a lens that they can use in every aspect of their lives, their other classes, their workplace, their lives, and so that is something that everybody benefits from, learning to think more critically and to see things happening that are, trying to discourage that, kind of teaching that really engages students in this critical thinking is, disheartening. But I know that, we are doing this work in a way that is reaching students and they're taking it out into the world. And so, it's a great opportunity we have.
And I think also it's an understanding of the structures of power, right? And as a sociologist out here, it's a constant change of the evolution of things. But we need to emphasize why were things put in place and who benefited from those arrangements. And we need to continue having those conversations. And it's not only about having a seat on the table, but also having a voice that is based on, the research and the experiences that we learn from people, that make sure that we don't continue to just replicate the things from the past and just changing the cast in a sense, and sort of really bring about this intersectionality, but also understand the structure of power and who benefits from those. And I think that's a key understanding, moving forward and trying to bring about some of the issues that we're discussing here today.
Thank you, everyone. Our next question actually received a lot of questions on this topic, and it's a very controversial, very hot topic lately in the United States. So I tried to combine all the questions in one that addresses the different questions that I received on the topic. So in the United States, and after the U.S. Supreme Court overturn of Roe versus Wade, what does the future of women's rights in the nation looks like?
Do you want anybody to take that?
Yes, the question for all the panel. So whoever would like to start.
Okay, Anne, do you want to start, since that's what we've been doing?
Go for it, Leandra.
Okay, so
Change the order.
I'm glad that you are getting these questions, and I'm glad that people are still are talking about this and thinking about this. And I think students being younger, oftentimes younger, are are scared and they don't know because they don't know what this means, because it's something that's always been. I think number one, it's about really, you know, we don't have to teach any political position, but we have to help students understand the political system, encourage students to vote. You know, we are allowed to encourage students to vote, and, you know, even in the classroom, not of course for any candidate or any position, but we are allowed to encourage that. And I think that, you know, it models that, I mean, this importance of being this type of democratic citizen, even when we're in a context that feels uncertain. Students may not, you know, even know what their place is. Why am I doing this if things are being called into question? And so I think helping them understand, I did a module on one of the bills that was contentious in the last year. I created a module around that bill and had students read the bill, because many students had never read a legislative bill. You know, it's not something they go read. But to know that these are so accessible, to see the language, to understand the implications of this is, you know, I mean, I'm not teaching political science, I'm not teaching this, but there are really important ways that we can integrate this into our classrooms, these kinds of conversations that help students become more actively engaged rather than just, you know, disillusioned by the system that is affecting them very much. And so, you know, understanding that there may be other ways that we can defend this right, you know, down the road a little bit, or, you know, teaching them other resources and ways. And I've been doing a lot of counter narrative work, which has been kind of interesting, doing, you know, basically learning to effectively challenge the disinformation that has been contributing to some of the, you know, social challenges we've been having. And so encouraging students to be more, you know, critical readers and understand all of these things, that then they can better come to their own conclusions about, you know, what is the most effective route to take? What can we do? What is my power in this, you know, until, you know, while Roe v. Wade is overturned. And so it's uncertain in that I don't know, I can't say, well, this is what we're going to do, this is what it's going to look like, but I can encourage the avenues that I believe are going to bring change. And that is, you know, as cliche as it may sound to students, it is through voting and through legislation and through activism, you know, being engaged locally with the organizations and the, you know, whether it's the clinics or Planned Parenthood that are doing this work directly. And it can be empowering as well. And it can also be encouraging. So, you know, they're not powerless as it may feel. And so I think we have to help students understand how to, you know, access and harness and channel that power. So
thank you, Dr. Preston. Dr. Babrisky, my next question is for you. As we all know, October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and we would like to know, how does legislation around abortion access affect other facets impacting women's rights, such as intimate partner violence?
Well, actually, I was going to add to Dr. Preston's talk right now that I think when we talk about, you know, access to abortion or non-access, right? When I look at students and I talk to students, coming from the sociological perspective, because actually Dr. Rivera was one of my professors in the PhD program, right? So it's the issues of power. So how does not having that access affect other aspects of your life structurally, right? So if you can't have access to certain reproductive rights and reproductive justice and healthcare, how does that impact when you have a baby and you don't have access to financial means or resources to take care of the child, or to have affordable housing or affordable daycare, or any of these other majorly structural issues that are often not part of the conversation when we talk about like Roe v. Wade. And I think both Dr. Preston, all of us here, when we are in the classroom, it's bringing that awareness to students to look beyond what may seem as a very simple answer or simple issue, to how complex and all of the other power forces that are interplaying. And yeah, domestic violence, you know, the more vulnerable a woman is or a person is, the more likely they will experience domestic violence on its many forms. So when you have more issues of vulnerability, whether it's financial or what have you, health, it creates a more vulnerable situation.
Thank you, Dr.
I don't know
Rivera.
if Dr. Rivera wants to comment.
Actually, we're running out of time. We only have 4 more minutes, so we want to be respectful of everyone's time, but I do have two last questions for Dr. Rivera. So the first one, you mentioned that you were the only man in that project in Argentina. So what are some effective strategies for men to be supportive allies to their female peers in academia, the workforce, and the community?
Well, I mean, I think my experience have been with women all the way through the workforce, right? That's been my reality. So sometimes when I get this question, it sort of reminds me of how strong the structural forces are, right? Of this kind of like these ideas that somehow, I got all the comments, right? And this from male and females, right? Oh, you're traveling with 12 women, blah, blah. These are professionals. I don't know where this is coming from, right? And I think we need to understand kind of like those type of intersectionalities that we have, and make sure that you go above the fold, right? In terms of looking at that, because and it's an issue of power, and I think and bringing that issue, is kind of like the issue of power and the choices that you have, right? And this is where we get into the rights, right? In terms of, not only reproductive health, but cyberbullying, sort of kind of like your opportunities as a woman, why are they different from point A to point B, and kind of like the choices that you make every day in the behaviors that you are, and sort of the local elections, Dr. Preston, right? In terms of, sometimes we get caught up in the big picture, but we forget to vote for school boards, for judges locally, for commissioners, and that's where everything starts out here, because this is where the decisions of curriculum in the schools do actually happen, and all those type of things. So I think that's one of the things that you can do out here. But I think, structurally, still, I mean, it's a reality that we're still male dominated. It's a male-dominated structure. I mean, that's not saying anything controversial out here, but it's how, we sort of look at those structures of power out here. And we know kind of like in these decisions, it's, women that have taken positions that continue to perpetuate those things. And that's a very complicated issue as well, because we have to look at structurally, because sometimes we tend to view it very individually, and that's where we get into problems, right? That it's just one Supreme Court judge that is responsible for everything, or it's just one politician, or it's one teacher out here. I think we need to start, pushing those boundaries and, rethink about the way power is distributed.
Thank you, Dr. Rivera. I really wanted to ask you one more question, but I know we have to be cognizant of everyone's time. We only have 1 more minute. So there were lots of more questions that we did not get the chance to answer, but I think it sparked so much interest. I do see, another event, part 2 coming up. So I would like to start by thanking you for your great presentations and wonderful discussions today. So I can't thank this panel enough for graciously answering all these questions that we received. And you, in your discussions, you were authentic and passionate advocates for women and women's rights and your work. So thank you so much for that. Thank you all for joining us. We hope to see you in future GPII events, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thank you all.